When it comes to pec isolation, chest isolation, one of the best things you can do is a fly type movement, but not all the movements are created equal. A lot of people, especially people who are new to the gym, seem to be under the impression that as long as you're flapping your wings, as long as you're doing a flying motion, you're going to work the chest. It's all identical. It's all the same. So using dumbbells for dumbbell flies or using a cable crossover machine for traditional cable crossover versus using a pec deck or something like that, it's all the exact same. And because of that misconception, they will choose just one or not the other. The reality is that they all have their place and they actually do hit the muscle differently. I'm going to go ahead and show you the difference between let's say the cable crossover versus the dumbbell fly, and then I'll discuss how the pec deck, even though I don't have one to show you, I'll discuss how that's different from both of those. Now with the dumbbell flies, the only resistance I'm getting is from gravity itself. So think about gravity pulling straight down in line with my arms. That's why this is the rack position, because it requires the least amount of effort to hold it here. All of the force that I'm exerting is rotating around my shoulder joint, and the farther it gets away from my shoulder, the more of a mechanical disadvantage I am at, and the more of a mechanical advantage the dumbbell has. So right here, if you look perpendicular to the horizon, gravity pulls perpendicular to the horizon, the force is going directly in line with my arm, right down behind my shoulder. And because of that, holding it in this position is not very difficult. Now, if I were to try to hold it here, just outside my shoulder, it would immediately become more difficult because now there's a bit of distance. My shoulder is still the point of rotation. That's where the force is coming from. But now, perpendicular to the horizon, the force from the dumbbell is being pulled just outside my shoulder, which creates an effective lever arm or a moment arm that is very short, but it's more effective at wanting to pull against the muscle. I have to use more force, more contractive force through my muscle, use more effort to keep it here. Now the further down I go, the more force is required and the heavier it feels. Obviously the weight is the exact same, but it feels heavier because the moment arm, the lever arm, has become longer. So the lower I go, the harder it is, and the higher I go, the easier it is, until at the top, it requires basically no effort. I can just kind of balance it here. And that's one of the reasons why dumbbell flies are especially good at getting a real deep stretch in the pecs. You can go real low, stretch it as deep as you want. It's got a huge mechanical advantage against your muscles, so you're at a mechanical disadvantage. Down here is very, very tough. It opens up your rib cage, it really stretches the pecs, and it requires the most amount of force and the hardest contraction right here in the bottom, especially when you straighten your arms out. Then it's even more difficult. So this is the most difficult right here. But you squeeze as hard as you can, you start to contract, and then as you get higher and higher, it gets easier and easier until finally you're right above your shoulders and your chest basically isn't working at all. My chest right now is completely relaxed. It's only my shoulders kind of holding this and balancing it. And that's why this range of motion here is basically useless. I'm not using much of my chest. This is my shoulders just kind of swaying the weights back and forth. Now, practically speaking, what that means is that switching with a few inches to come all the way in to touch the dumbbells doesn't make much of a difference with dumbbell flies. This kind of micromanagement style of saying, oh, the dumbbells have to touch. In reality, for your chest activation, it doesn't matter much because it's all just kind of balancing above your torso. Your chest doesn't have to contract in order to do that. It's more of your shoulders. But in the bottom, again, it's not that the weight is pulling through your torso. Now the weight is pulling from all the way out there where your hands are at. So it has the longest lever arm and it has the biggest advantage against your muscles. The exact same weight that almost feels too light up here suddenly feels monstrously heavy down here, especially if you're doing it with nice, almost straight arms. You want a little bit of a bend. But if your arms are really straight and you have a really long lever arm and you're doing nice, strict, slow tempoed form, even lightweight become brutal. You have all of your real power. The meat of the movement is happening in the bottom position. This is where you have to become good at, and your body has to adapt to maximum contractile force while the pec muscle itself is completely extended. But at the top, the whole second half of the motion, it's doing very, very minimal. And the closer you get to being over your shoulders, the less it's gonna do. Another setup is when you use a cable crossover machine and you have the cable height set to about your shoulder height and it is coming from directly next to you. It's a parallel line with your body. So when I'm in the bottom of the movement, the weight is coming from beside me. I'm going to pull it across to get it to the center of my chest. Now this does the exact same thing as the dumbbell, but on the other end of the spectrum. This primarily works the in close portion, that tight, fully contracted portion of the chest. The reason why is because if the weight is coming from beside me, then the same way that holding the dumbbells over my shoulders is basically just balancing them because the gravity's pulling them in line with my arms. It's the same thing here. If the weight is coming from directly beside me, then holding it here, it's just in line with the direction of force, so it doesn't require much. And the same way is that as I contract it a little bit, the moment arm, the lever arm between the point of exertion, my shoulder, and now where the weight's coming from, which is my hand, is pretty short, so it doesn't require a lot of effort. But the more I come in, now the longer and longer that lever arm is. Now suddenly the weight is pulling from way out here in front of me, but my contractile force is still coming from here, the point of origin, my shoulder. So it's the most difficult here in the center because that makes the longest moment arm, the longest lever arm. Just like the dumbbells gave me the most effort down in the bottom, and it's basically teaching my body how to do maximum contractile force when the muscle is fully extended. This is the opposite. This is teaching my body how to provide maximum contractile force when the muscle is completely contracted already. So when the muscle is in its shortest position, it has to squeeze and flex even harder to really tighten it up those last few inches. So it's providing the same kind of half and half. This provides the top half, whereas the dumbbells provided the bottom half. But that's where the more traditional cable crossovers come into play. The advantage of using a traditional cable crossover machine, not a functional trainer, but a traditional cable crossover machine that has the uprights very far apart, is that you're basically pulling the weight from a 45-degree angle. So it's not coming from directly beside you, it's not coming from directly behind you, it's coming from a backward 45-degree angle. So it requires force even in the bottom position. I'm having to contract against force. And then as I go through the range of motion, although there is an arcing motion to my arm, as I go through the range of motion, it's more or less following a roughly straight line from the back to the front at a 45-degree angle. So all the way through the range of motion, all the way to the fully contracted position, it's still pulling off axis. It's still trying to pull my hands apart. So it's still requiring the same amount of force to keep it closed. This is a very consistent force from the bottom all the way to the top. And if you see, typically grab the cables, pitch 1 foot forward so you can keep your balance, and you lean forward, and you can see that through the range of motion, there's never any point where I'm relaxed. Even in the bottom position, if I were to stop tightening up and relax completely, it still wants to pull my arms back. Even in the bottom, there is force pulling my arms apart, trying to stretch my pecs. And as I contract all the way through the range of motion to the bottom, even here, it's still trying to separate my hands at the exact same angle. So if I were to suddenly relax, my hands come apart. This is a very consistent way to stretch and contract the pec through the entire range of motion with consistent force being applied. When it comes to machine selection, whether it's dumbbells, cable crossover, functional trainer, a total gym, some other type of thing, a pec deck, it's always about where's the weight coming from? How is the force being applied? Dumbbells, the maximum force is in the bottom. Hands out wide, right here. That has the advantage of giving you hard contraction, the hardest contraction when the muscle is completely expanded in the bottom, but the top half suffers. With traditional parallel cable, the advantage is the exact opposite. The maximum contractile force is here when your muscle is almost fully collapsed, fully contracted. That's where you're applying all the force. But the expense is that the lower half of the motion doesn't really do much. A traditional cable crossover machine with wide set uprights gives you a 45-degree angle of approach with the weight. And what that means is that it's a very consistent force against your muscles from the bottom all the way to the top. It really allows you to get a full range of motion, a full stretch, and then also a full contraction, and it's the exact same resistance all throughout the motion. This is very similar to a pec deck. Having that pec deck does the same thing. It's the same force at the first inch, the first few centimeters of the bottom, as it is the very, very top. It's a full range of motion under pressure. So it's not about free weights versus cables versus machines. It's more about what you're trying to accomplish, what you prefer, what you think you need to work on, and then choosing the exercise appropriately. Anyway, if you have ideas for videos or you have any more questions, comment down below, and thanks for watching. Bye.